there's a non-zero chance that we might have a pro-Bitcoin president in the White House.
Yes.
On the Republican side, we have Ron Desantis. And on the Democratic side, we have RFK Jr., which has literally gone out to say at the Bitcoin conference, I will protect your right to self-custody, all that stuff. Right.
Yep. So, and he went even further at Freedom Fest last week in Tennessee.
Oh, please let us know.
There.
What did he say? What did he say?
Oh, I read a summary of it, that he would usher in hyper-Bitcoinization. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I don't know if he used that word, but I'll also throw out, it's not just the two candidates in each political party that are polling second right now in the polls. There are also candidates on the Republican side, Vivek Ramaswamy, Francis Suarez, right, that are pro Bitcoin. It's so interesting. I haven't seen Tim Scott come out yet, and he's in an interesting position because he's the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, which may ultimately be forced to take regulatory action. I actually think that the impact of the XRP decision, SEC versus Ripple, is going to increase the probability that legislation moves before the end of the Biden presidency, because it just absolutely threw into further disarray the U.S. crypto regulatory question, right? Because now the SEC had its wings clipped by a federal judge, which it clearly didn't expect to do. You rarely see federal agencies undertake bet the farm litigation like that, where they hand the judicial branch a decision over the extent of their jurisdiction. The SEC took that gamble and lost. Okay, but now what does that mean? It probably does mean that Congress, there's a higher probability that Congress acts. I don't know that it's 50-50 yet, but it's getting there. And Senator Tim Scott, who's of course running for president, is the ranking Republican on Senate banking. So he's going to have to be involved. I have not seen him take a stance yet on Bitcoin, but there are people around him who are pro-Bitcoiners. And by the way, I just talked to somebody last week. There are more pro-Bitcoiners around Trump this time as well. I don't think Trump understood when he put out his tweet, and I answered him back in, it was probably 2019, 2020, because Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, is not pro-Bitcoin, but people around him are. People like Brian Brooks, for example, very pro-Bitcoin, right? So Mnuchin's got some people around him who are pro-Bitcoin, but Trump was listening to Mnuchin in being anti-Bitcoin. And that tweet thread I responded to Trump's, back then he was on Twitter. And it got a lot of engagement from people saying, hey, you really ought to sit down and listen to the Bitcoiners because you're raging against the deep state, so to speak. And you have more in common than you realize with the Bitcoiners. So the funny thing is, I think I know there are some folks around Trump, because what's funny is people have been reaching out to me. And so I'm hearing from the different campaigns that, there are more pro-Bitcoiners than you think. Do not be shocked. I'm not predicting it, because Trump is certainly on the record as being very, very anti-Bitcoin. But I think that ice may be thawing.
Let me ask Caitlin a question, because just go back to different. Caitlin, you and I have discussed in the past. You've given me some clue into it, but I think a lot of the listeners would be very interested to know kind of, so the Fed really shut you down in terms of getting your license. Can you just talk a little bit, take us through the politics of that and how that happened and what you think? I know you kind of got the inside baseball on what was going down, and I'd be very curious to hear, I think the listeners would too, to hear kind of how you got shut down. And, was it Jamie Dimon? Was it Powell? Was it Biden? What was the genesis of your denial?
Well, we do know the White House was involved. That is publicly disclosed. Right. And you could see it from the fact that the Fed's denial of Custodia was announced at the same time as an anti-crypto policy by the Fed.
Right.
And coordinated with a statement from the National Economic Council at the White House, all released at the same time. And then Custodia's master account was denied exactly 2.5 hours later. This is all military precision timing. Right. It was denied by the Kansas City Fed. These entities are supposedly independent, right? The Fed is supposed to be independent of the White House. The Kansas City Fed alleges that it's independent of the board of directors on such decisions, but it clearly was not. And I'm not just saying that by pointing to the timing coincidence. I'm saying that because we had insiders tell us what was going on. And the name of the person at the White House. I'd never met this person. I have no idea how he knew who Custodia was. But when I looked him up, guess what? He's very connected to Elizabeth Warren. So, shooting the proverbial, stallion to scatter the herd was seemingly the strategy. And that's all I can say. I do know more. But I want to thank the folks who did come forward, because there were pro-crypto people in the Biden White House who were appalled by what happened to Custodia. And yes, there is a lot more. But as you know, the end of the story has not been written yet. Right. There's some really great things happening to Custodia right now. Okay. And like I said, I'm having fun.